I think that's one reason. That's one issue. There's a capacity side of stuff, but I think the other problem is it requires a re-architecting of the network. Like most RAN chips, even on the even in the sort of Verizon side of things, and you talk to someone like Orange and they say they don't even see any need for doing this. But what you'd need to do is really sort of centralize your RAN. Like it's all at mast sites, yeah?
Yes, indeed.
And therefore, who needs to support general purpose workloads at mast sites? Like all that you do at mast sites is RAN compute.
Well, then you get people talking about inference at the edge and that sort of thing.
No, I'm talking about the Intel original story.
What other general purpose computing tasks would you do?
I'm equally skeptical, by the way, about this idea of AI inferencing. It's exactly the same thing. Who would want to do this sort of thing at a mast site as opposed to just doing RAN compute there?
If I'm trying my best to give them the benefit of the doubt, to not be cynical.
Yeah.
It would be, again, we're looking to the future. We're looking for a time where drones are a lot more ubiquitous. Automated vehicles on the whole are a lot more ubiquitous. Maybe
I'm disappointed in you, Scott. You start talking about remote control surgery in a minute.
I'm not advocating this. I'm steel manning the position.
Yeah.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. We're back in the studio, having brought you the last one on site in Dublin with Cohere. We thought we might have a guest this week, but we don't. So it's just the two of us. They don't have them very often, do they? In the just the two of us ones.
They don't.
So there we are.
Yeah, they're all too rare these days.
Right. Well, not that we don't appreciate all of our guests, of course.
No.
But it does mean that we get to just talk unadulterated shit for close to 2 hours, which I know is why our adoring audience listens in.
Oh boy.
And so, yeah, I mean, we're going to talk about FYUZ, the event, but I guess in sort of opening bollocks, we can talk about some more anecdotal stuff from there. Give a shout out to Michael Roger, who we hung out with. Michael Roger, Canadian guy from Huawei, who regularly comments on this pod and is a regular listener. So hi, Michael. I presume you're listening to this one. And it's great. We went and had some beers at the Ferryman with him and had a good natter. So it's great to meet him. On that same night, we've got to give a little shout out to someone who I'm expecting to be on the pod quite soon, who's Zoe from, I still call them CC Group, but I guess they're Hoffman now. I don't know, or some hybrid.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, of course.
Hoffman Group, CC-Fman.
The Hoffman's CC Group.
Yeah.
Or something.
And she was there in her PR capacity and thus took it upon herself to find those of us who had been hanging out in the Ferryman on the Monday night a bite to eat. But what she and none of us knew was you can't get any food after about 8 o'clock in Dublin on a Monday.
Not only can you not get any food, you also can't get back across the river at a certain point.
So we had this
critical for where we were staying.
Goose chase. We started, we left it too late in the pub, and then we started looking around for places that are open, and we couldn't find any restaurants that are open. And I remembered there was a brew dog, so it's our favourite drink. Down the road, and they always do like wings and nachos and all that kind of bar food.
Apparently not always.
No, and then we turned up there and they closed the kitchen. And then
it was still quite early as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was about 9:30, something like that.
That's ridiculous.
And then we just went, oh, maybe there's this place that's on the other side of the river. The bit of Dublin we're in is like on the eastern side, like the entrance of the river, and it's like very gentrified Docklands sort of area. It's all white collar buildings and PwC and various people. Salesforce, yeah.
Meta's probably there.
Yeah, so actually that's a good point, isn't it? Because Ireland's where a hell of a lot of American companies have their HQs, so that's probably the area. And anyway,
they don't have to pay any tax, do they?
Well, they pay less.
Well,
yeah. European Union's not very happy about that either, because there's nothing like more than taxing the fuck out of people.
Yeah.
Anyway, cut long story short, we were on one side of this river. Our hotel and a potential last option for a restaurant was on the other side of the river. So we went, fuck it, let's just go over the river. And we got to the bridge, and it was some kind of moving bridge. And they just said, yeah, well, you can't cross this bridge till 6 a.m.
Yeah.
So then we had to schlep even further in and find another bridge
for big ships.
Yeah, exactly.
But there was nothing coming down the lift.
No, it's like they did it just to wind us up.
Yeah.
Could you try to swim?
We could have tried to swim.
It's quite it's not the sort of river you want to swim across. I don't think it's like trying to swim across the Thames.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, it's quite wide.
It's wide and probably really dirty, and it's probably got a strong undercurrent or something as well. So you'd end up about 6 miles away.
Yeah, I don't think we need to
If you really want it, you can make it.
I don't think we need to overanalyze the reasons why we didn't try and swim across.
Yeah.
I'm just disappointed.
And then we had to schlep a bit more, and then morale was flagging, and we just went fuck it.
Well, people
let's go back to the
dropped
hotel,
out, didn't they?
Yeah. People kept
as we carried on,
peeling off.
Yeah,
and then by the time we got back to our hotel, which also wasn't doing food,
there were 2 other depressed people downstairs.
They were
nursing a pint.
There was Sean and David from Telecom TV, and by that stage, Zoe was really feeling the lack of dinner, and she ended up just calling it. They have a thing in Ireland called a spice bag, which is basically chips, typically like bits of like chicken nugget or whatever, some fried onions.
Sounds like something out of Dune.
Yeah, and then some sort of variable spice powder, and they stick it in a bag. And this seems to be the Dublin equivalent of just going to the chippy and getting. And anyway, that did the trick in the end.
It did the trick. It wasn't the healthiest dinner, but
it certainly wasn't.
It tasted good.
But yeah, that was it. It was really good. We'll talk about the event itself in a sec, but Dublin's cool. We went out on Sunday, and that was good fun. And it's actually surprisingly small city, Dublin. You can get around a lot of it just walking, can't you?
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a funny little incident on the road. So thanks for everyone who joined us on that odyssey. I don't think that's all we've really got to talk about. There might be other anecdotes from it, but I think we can just crack on as we got a hard stop today. And let's just talk about the event itself. Why don't I pass it to you, Ian? Start with just your top line, recollections of the FYUZ event.
Yeah, I think it's a good event I think we were saying when we were there, because it's quite small and self-contained, and it's quite focused on a particular topic. Like openness generally, I think, and disaggregation in networks. It's easy to find the right people and have the kind of chats that you want to have. And well, the Ferryman itself, while we were there, one of the reasons we took so long is just loads of people we know are just in that pub. It was quite serendipitous, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. But I think it's quite sad to see what's become of it in a way over the last few years. Because I haven't been going in previous years. I always thought it was a bit too in the weeds for me. Well, you haven't been in previous years, but you were probably there before they rebranded it to FYUZ. Back in the days when it was the Telecom Infra Project, whatever. I remember going to one in the Excel. Yeah, which was huge. I mean, they had about 2,000 people from Facebook alone, I think, back in the days. I mean, for people who don't know what TIP is, why don't you do that? But I think it was formed not actually that long after I joined Light Reading. So sort of about 2016, 2017, and the whole point was it was the latest example at the time of a kind of big tech player wading into telecom and going, this sector's moribund and it needs a kick up the arse. Yeah, and we can bring our and we might return to that theme in a bit. Yeah, we can bring our sort of internet mentality and expressions that you love, Scott, like DevOps and doing things in a more agile way. We like a bit of agility. And we can bring some of the software approaches that we've kind of got used to working with as internet players for a long time, and cloud technologies and common IT platforms and all this. We can sort of introduce these into telecom and help kind of reinvigorate it and improve the economics of it, and maybe sort of spur innovation as well with the funding we're going to put in. That was the kind of general pitch, I guess. And I think the reason people would go, well, why the hell was Facebook interested in that? I think at the time it was very much presented as Facebook had like hundreds of millions of users, obviously in places like the US and the UK and Japan, Europe, whatever. But when it came to countries like Africa that were kind of largely underserved by connectivity, you don't get the kind of fiber network rollout and the 4G connectivity that you have in developed markets. They were thinking, if we can lower the costs of deploying some of this network equipment through some of these things we're talking about, then maybe we can bring connectivity to those markets. And that there was talk of the next billion and that. The next billion, and then all of a sudden you can see why Facebook might be interested, because it's all of a sudden a huge new sort of advertising market for it to be. Yeah, and the general trend feeling is why they're doing it. Really. Yeah, and you touched on it. The general trend is you've got very cash rich companies.
But they think of sectors that are adjacent to them that they don't have direct control over, but which do have a direct effect on their prosperity.
Yeah.
And obviously connectivity for any internet company, connectivity is vital.
Yeah.
So you get all these sort of digital companies, social media, e-tailers, whatever.
Yeah.
They've got an adjacent interest in making sure that consumers can get access their shit whenever they want, as high bandwidth as possible, and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm just agreeing with you that this is why they show an interest.
And then I think the telcos are interested because they're always having a whinge about overpaying for equipment, and any company wants to pay its suppliers less, really, and so that maybe that's just the thing that's always going to happen. But they've always been concerned about trying to boost margins. There's not been any real growth, let's be honest, in the telecom sector since the sort of mobile phone boom, the early mobile phone boom.
Yeah.
I don't even believe there was any growth with 4G. I think that's a complete sort of misconception of what actually went on during 4G.
By growth, are you talking about
Sales
revenues
growth
of operators?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might have had at the time when 4G was coming along more people getting into the mobile phone market because they weren't as saturated as they are now.
Mm-hmm.
But basically all 4G did was sort of replace voice revenues with data revenues. If you look at the ARPU trend, it's actually just carried on going down since the sort of 2G, 3G days. So 4G didn't really revitalise them in that sense.
No, I would say, this is a bit of a tangent and I could be talking shit. That's always possible. When there was metered voice and even metered text messages, like you had a finite amount you were about to send, presumably things were a lot better for operators.
Well, there wasn't anybody using it. That was the problem. You need to get the balance between having prices that are going to attract people into the market and create a mass market, and actually having a model that allows you to sort of grow what each person's spending. Back in the days of the mobile phone boom, when ARPU was going like that, because it starts off being very expensive, and then
for people listening, he's doing a downwards curve. So the
price starts off very high and then it falls. Obviously, it's just a general trend that you get.
Yeah, so the ARPU declines there, but I would have thought, with
you make up
with
for
3G and 4G, with mobile data and the ability to make phone calls all around the world for free through WhatsApp or whatever. I presume that did them some damage.
Well, it will do. But if WhatsApp would be a good thing if no one's using a phone and you've still got to pay £20 a month to get your basic connection. Yeah, the money's still going to the operator. Just to get a subscription. You're not getting cumulative revenue maybe from someone making an international call in the way that you would then because they're using WhatsApp. But if nobody had any phones and all of a sudden these data services were what had spurred people to actually buy them, then great. But the problem is it's been a saturated. Everybody's got a mobile phone. Even the cows have got connectivity nowadays. So they're not using iPhones yet.
Bluetooth cows.
So I guess from the telcos are interested because it's like a no sales growth market, and therefore your only way to sort of boost profits is by driving costs down, and driving costs down by getting more suppliers in the market who are competitive against the ones that are already there, or introducing new technologies that look more appealing. So they were kind of very much into this idea of this is really the explanation, I guess, for why they like concepts like disaggregation and the cloud, because they promise efficiencies and competition that you don't get in the old world.
One of the companies we hung out with at the venue and at a pub after was Samsung Networks.
Yeah,
and they are, I think, am I right to say they're viewed as the single biggest beneficiary of the sort of Open RAN movement in terms of it giving them a greater fighting chance of penetrating the now duopoly, because we've banned all the Chinese vendors.
They're perceived that way, but I don't personally think that's why Samsung's getting used as an alternative to Ericsson and Nokia. Right. I think Samsung's market share is pretty much the same as it was before all this Open RAN commotion, I think.
Right.
They were dealing with. When did they get their deal with Verizon? 2020, when Open RAN was 5 years younger than it is now. Right. They were being used by Three in the UK for 4G. They've had a presence in South Korea and everything for ages. They have a complete set of products. You don't need Open RAN to be able to use Samsung. So
Right. Yes. Good point. But then, I suppose the rationale was that with Open RAN, which, you know, for those people listening who aren't that familiar with it, is it's just a way of allowing you to be able to chop and change many of the components that exist inside the radio.
Yeah, but people aren't doing that. They're still just buying all the stuff.
But that was the rationale: is if you can chop and change, then you'll do this. Sort of supermarket job where you go, I'll have a bit of Samsung there, a bit of Fujitsu there, a bit of Nokia, a bit of Ericsson there. Yeah, it hasn't turned out that way.
No, it hasn't. I mean, if you look at the Open RAN deals that are getting announced recently, and some of this was going on at the tip show, I was going to say, FYUZ, it's been rebranded to, and we'll come back to that. But yeah, just on this little tangent with Samsung, the deals that have been announced in Open RAN recently, and Samsung's been in all of them, I think, really. But the big one I think people are probably thinking of is the Vodafone thing. It's very much a Samsung doing everything thing in Germany and other countries. So
just like the Ericsson thing with AT&T.
Yeah, there's one other supplier that got announced in from the kind of RAN world that had a very low key, not even highlighted by Vodafone, and Samsung has had very little to say on it, which is Fujitsu, well, Onefinity as it calls itself now, that said it's going to be doing some of the radios. Very much seems to me like quite similar to the AT&T Ericsson deal, where Ericsson's pretty much doing everything apart from a few small cells that Fujitsu is contributing. So yeah, I guess if Open RAN's made it easier for you to put Samsung's baseband with Fujitsu's radios and have a bit of sort of of a multi-vendor mix there, but there's not a lot of it going on basically. So FYUZ or the Telecom Infra Project show, whatever it used to be called back in sort of 2018, 2019, used to be a really big deal. Right. I mean, I remember going to the one I think in 2019 when Vodafone actually announced the big tender that has only just been the results of which have only just come out. I mean, who would have thought in 2019 that it would have taken until 2025? It's a bit of a kind of metaphor for how slow moving the industry is. That it's taken 6 years.
And then even the announcement was sort of underwhelming.
The announcement was underwhelming.
Continuity,
it was more or less continuity and a few thousand sites for Samsung, which is a sort of mix of taking out some stuff that they already had and adding in new sites, basically. But a lot sort of lower scale than they were originally talking about. Well, I think they first said 100,000, then it got increased to 170,000 sites across Europe and Africa. And the results of the tender have not been like that. And it's taken so long for this to eventually happen because of, I mean, COVID was a disruption that they didn't foresee, obviously, in 2019. But even then, it just seems to have been a really sort of slow moving affair. And I think that's kind of what sort of happened to tip really over that period of time, is that Facebook's kind of lost interest. This has been quite widely reported on, that they just don't put the money into. They were the big sponsor of TIP, and it was obviously. I mean, we used to go and you used to get like lavish food laid on for you.
Well, I think if we're
get old fashioned for breakfast sort of thing, And
if we're looking for sort of barometers of certainly the funding. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty decent in when it was in the Excel, and I never went to Madrid ones, but apparently the grub was pretty decent there. And I got to say, this year it was kind of school dinners, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Madrid was, I think it's going back maybe 4 years. I'm trying to think when the first one was in Madrid. I'm going to say like probably 21, 22. And we had a couple of years there, and then it's been in Dublin for 2 years, and there was certainly at least 2 years in Madrid. So it's been 4 years, and I think the first FYUZ branded one was Madrid. That was when they kind of decided.
Right, yeah.
FYUZ doesn't really mean anything. It's FYUZ. It doesn't stand for anything. It's like one of these made up words that they liked the idea of fusion. And the whole metaphor that they were really trying to push at the very first event in Madrid was like food. It was very food based, like in the same way that you can, bring together different ingredients to create elaborate new dishes. That was the metaphor they liked.
I see. Right. Yeah, I see where they're going with that.
Yeah, this is what you can do with telco networks. You can pick and mix ingredients from different suppliers and put them together. And
just like this tapas you're having. Yeah.
Just like this tapas you're having. And they even have this, which is still there now. I think if you notice all the stands, it's all the same. Every stand's like looks like it's made out of balsa wood,
right?
And there's no kind of they're not very elaborate.
Yeah.
So it's almost like this idea that the underlying platform is the same. It's like maybe common sort of off the shelf hardware and servers, but the ingredients.
You think that's a visual metaphor that they're doing there?
I think so. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But it's just got progressively smaller, it seems, as the years have gone on, and Facebook's had had a few financial challenges years ago, which led to some cost cutting, and I think one consequence of that. And I think also they'd seen that people coming. We were talking to Jeff about this actually, Jeff at Rakuten, who's the chief marketing officer of Rakuten Symphony. Give him a shout out because I think he listens to the pod quite regularly.
And we had a good natter with him.
But I think he made the really interesting point that you see these tech giants coming along with plans to sort of disrupt telecom, and they kind of give it a go for a couple of years, and then they kind of clear off, and it's left to somebody else to sort of pick up the baton.
Well, that was a dynamic that came up in a few conversations, which is, you get it, like, if people are regular listeners and they listen to our last podcast, you will have heard, and we'll probably touch back on this, you will have heard Ray from Cohere be very upbeat and positive on the news that was, for me, very much sort of looming in the background of this event, which was the big partnership between Nvidia and Nokia. And he thought it would be he thinks it will be a really profoundly catalyzing thing and all that sort of thing. But then there's plenty of other people that sort of reflect on what you were just talking about, which is you get these initiatives, you'll get someone from the outside, like a big tech company or whatever, put this infusion of cash and energy and all that sort of thing, and it just gets absorbed.
Yeah.
But there's not much sign that the industry has markedly been in any way altered by it.
Well, I mean, you can go back further than FYUZ to find this sort of stuff going on, I would say. I think the first signs of it really were there in NFV.
Yeah.
Which is what, 2011, 2012, I guess, and SDN, software-defined networking. This idea that I actually agree with this to a big extent, and I think the industry will sort of have to go in this direction. But this idea that a no-growth telecom sector where the equipment markets are actually quite small in the bigger scheme of things. So if you look at the radio access network products market itself, which is one of the bigger ones anyway, compared to what you sell in broadband like boxes each year, it's about 35 billion, I think, last year. Say it's 40 billion, 45 in a good year. It's a relatively small market compared with like the bigger computer industry, the IT chip, the chips business, all these the mainstream IT market, let's say. And I was chatting to Adrian O'Connor from Benatel, which is an Irish radio unit developer at TIP, just to sort of on the sidelines, kind of ran into him, and he was saying you get these companies like Analog Devices who they've worked with, and the development costs of the silicon that goes into some of this modern day equipment, when we're talking about sort of 5G massive MIMO stuff and all this, it's hundreds of millions they have to spend. And then the ROI is just not there to sort of justify the expense of doing it.
Yeah.
And therefore there's this concern is can the industry keep funding? Where's the ROI? Where's the justification for doing this? And you see players struggling and they're not as profitable as they once were. Even the big kit vendors like Ericsson and Nokia, and this is the argument, I guess, for let's try and leverage what the bigger IT industry is doing. Is that if you can, this gets into the Nvidia story that you were saying everybody's talking about.
Yeah, we can dip in and out of that.
If you can use the chips that an Intel or an Nvidia or an AMD is developing for lots of other things at the same time, like the core technologies basically comes from, they might be things that go into ordinary servers. There might be, things that go into ordinary PCs. The actual fundamental building blocks of that technology are this. You kind of riding on the back of that. All of a sudden, the economics improve and it becomes a lot more attractive. And then it relieves pressure on some of these.
It's kind of cloud economics, isn't it?
It's cloud economics. So I get that. I completely go along with that argument, and I think that was one of the things that was probably being. Was probably in the background when things like SDN and NFV first came along, and this idea that, Intel's obviously very big part in anything to do with virtualization, and their kind of general purpose silicon. They were the original kind of silicon company that was sort of proposing, I think, that you use chip technologies that are developed for the broader IT industry and common off-the-shelf hardware like Dell servers and HP servers to do stuff rather than having these specifically designed appliances.
It's a sort of commoditization of compute resource, and my understanding, and I'll encourage you to sort of dig a bit deeper in this, because I think among your many strengths as a telecoms journalist, I'd say a real forte of yours has been looking at emerging technologies in the radio space, in the RAN space. I mean, I take the piss out of you that you're always banging on about Open RAN or vRAN or something like that.
Yeah.
But you know, and I don't dive as deep as you in this, and one of my, whether it's a forte or whether necessity is just the mother of invention, I tend to just want to reduce these things down into as simplistic words of one syllable as possible. And so my understanding is that this move, as you say, started or maybe even predated that, but we've been talking about for at least 10 years in the context of network function virtualization, software-defined networking, of getting as much of this stuff, which is typically done on hardware and or with proprietary software, into a sort of more of a software environment, and furthermore a more open software environment where that software is not constrained in where it can reside. And ultimately, you know, all things being equal, you could do, I don't know what proportion, I'll get you to specify if you want, what proportion of the processing that currently happens on the radio site you could do remotely. And that's all, and that's back to the cloud economics that we're talking about. So that's why I
think the word open gets a bit bent out of shape with all this. I mean, basically what they're doing is talking about using, if you're using Intel silicon to do it, that's something that goes into like hundreds of millions of devices.
Yeah, it's in my laptop here. I've got a little vPro sticker on my laptop.
It's in all data centers. It's in all laptops. It's a platform that's widely used. It has an enormous ecosystem behind it, and therefore it seems open because the whole world uses it. Yeah. I mean, you try and move off x86, which is their core architecture, onto something else. It's actually harder said than done. But it's not like dealing with a custom ASIC where you're only working on that custom ASIC. There might be a relatively small pool of software developers who actually understand what's going on, and you know, a relatively small pool of people who are actually sort of familiar with some of the integral technologies to that. That's why,
so I guess what we're talking,
that's why it's open, I guess.
So I guess open in what you're describing is set up in opposition to custom or bespoke.
Yeah.
More than just closed. Although when something is custom and bespoke, that is generally viewed as closed. If, for example, you're reliant on Ericsson silicon and Ericsson software, and various other bits and bobs from Ericsson, you're kind of committed to them for the full Monty.
Yeah, but it's more. It's not that you're less committed to Intel. And this is one of the problems of like. This is why I don't really like the openness discussion sometimes. It's not that you're any less committed to Intel. It's just maybe it's better to be committed to Intel because the whole world's on Intel than committed to one small company that only does things for the RAN.
And I think that's one of the arguments in favour of. I mean, we might as well keep going down this rabbit hole in favour of AI RAN, which for me, and maybe I'm mistaken in thinking this, basically sounds like NVIDIA RAN to me.
Yeah. Well, some people, I mean, there are people who talk about AI RAN where they don't mean NVIDIA.
No, because there's the AI RAN Alliance, and that's got various.
Well, that is NVIDIA, but there are people who say. I mean, I think NVIDIA probably coined the expression AI RAN, but there are people who'll say, well, AI's been in the RAN for a long time before
in terms
NVIDIA,
of like automation and that sort of thing.
Before NVIDIA, before generative AI came along, which is what pretty much made NVIDIA what it is. It's not very old, obviously. It's 2 or 3 years old or whatever. That AI has been used in the RAN and in RAN technologies like Marvell technology, which does Nokia's sort of processors. They have like AI and ML tools in their, in their silicon, and you can do all sorts of like AI for RAN stuff with that. You can do, you can sort of substitute some machine learning stuff for what you do, for what a person might do. You can. All these kind of little tweaks and improvements that you'd make through what people call AI and ML technologies are kind of things that have been used in the RAN for quite a long time. So I think some people push back on the idea that AI RAN is just NVIDIA, but NVIDIA's the company that's kind of popularized the expression, I guess, and they have a specific meaning in that you're using their kind of chips to do it. But it's exactly the same, what you were saying, it's exactly the same argument, really, as the custom, versus general purpose Intel stuff. That's really the kind of idea of doing it. They're almost a kind of successor to Intel, their pitch would be, I mean, if you talk to Ronnie Vasishta, which I think we've both done recently, but I met him a few times.
NVIDIA guy.
And if you said to him and I think I've asked him this question, it's like, isn't it an awkward thing for RAN developers to kind of all of a sudden have to kind of deal with NVIDIA, because it means they have to kind of redo their software to work on CUDA and your platform. And I think his response to this was an on-the-record interview, but his response was like, yeah, but the whole world's moving to CUDA.
Exactly, and that's the thing. I mean, we might as well keep exploring the NVIDIA thing as the conversation's naturally gravitating in that direction. And we got to talk about it a bit on the last pod. But this is an opportunity for us to talk about it. No disrespect to the guests we had in the last pod, but this is an opportunity for us to just talk about it between us two.
Yeah.
And actually, some of the conversations I had, not least with Ray, because we should mention that, and I think I did on the last pod, but we hung out with Cohere on the Sunday night as well.
Yeah.
And I ended up sitting next to him at dinner, and we carried on these chats. And and Ray is actually a very good and articulate and passionate sort of positive exponent of all this stuff.
Yeah.
And I
thought you did a very good job actually on the pod that we did, the main one in the show, of like explaining what Cohere does and how USM sort of because I think one of the things you wanted to achieve with that pod was actually let's find out what their technology does really. But I thought you did a really good job of sort of just explaining it in as simpler terms as you possibly can without really going into the science of what USM is.
He knew he was talking to me, and you had to dumb it down.
No, he wasn't. I don't think he was dumbing it down. He just sort of did a good,
just being English and self-effacing. Yeah. But and I'm trying to get the big picture. So there's a lot of quite complex technology we're dealing with. Obviously, Cohere itself is quite complex. It's messing around with waveforms and that sort of thing. And then, the NVIDIA thing did come up. In fact, we had one fun bit. I think Pierre clipped it in the preview where you expressed some skepticism, and he pushed back quite forcefully with your skepticism, didn't he?
Yeah.
Now you get to express it.
I don't mind him pushing back on my skepticism. I expect that, but I think he said you were quite cynical, and I don't like that, because I don't think no journalist should be cynical, but every journalist should be skeptical.
And I think I think the word cynical, I'm certainly not going to want to put words in Ray's mouth or reader's mind, but the word cynical sometimes gets used by people who want you to be more sort of unconditionally approving of a thing.
Yeah. But cynical implies you go in there with a deliberate agenda to sort of undermine it, which I don't think I do.
Often cynical gets used where I think the word skeptical is perhaps more descriptive. Yeah. But anyway, but the point was it was an interesting dynamic, because, like I said, Ray does a great job of selling up the benefits, and this is what I'm roundabout leading up to is what I took away. My understanding of it is, we were talking about earlier, if we have a world where the telecom space is much more virtualized, cloudified, AI native, all these terms, then the assertion is that all sorts of other benefits and efficiencies will come from it. But where I think you're skeptical, and which I share your skepticism, is no one's really articulated those. They're asking for a leap of faith, which is probably why words like cynical get brought up. They're asking for a leap of faith. And I think we're entitled to be like, well, this isn't a religious cult.
No, exactly.
It requires more than blind faith.
I think the other reason to be skeptical about it is, and as I say, if you're a journalist, you should be skeptical anyway, because the whole point is to sort of raise questions and ask, do I really believe what this company's telling me? Otherwise, we'd all be doing PR. But the reason for people to sort of doubt what they're saying is partly because of what's happened with TIP, I think, over the years, and with FYUZ, and with the Intel story. Let's say Intel would have hoped by now, going back to the start of Open RAN and Virtual RAN, that the whole world would have moved in that direction, and yet the vast majority of equipment across the planet is still purpose-built RAN. There's a very, very small amount of proper cloud RAN stuff out there, and the only company I think really that's done it at scale at all is Samsung.
Right.
It probably in like the Verizon network, I think, is where you really see it being used, and that's maybe the only example of this being used at scale across. I think they told me something like 35,000 sites now, and that's Intel Silicon. That's the best showcase really for Intel's like it's general purpose stuff that it's pitching at the RAN sector. There's kind of Sapphire Rapids, Granite Rapids stuff that we've probably talked about on the pod, and I've certainly written about a lot. That's the best showcase for that, because that is being used in a developed market, like in city areas, to support high-speed 5G services across loads of sites. But there's not a lot of the rest of that. Huawei doesn't do any. They don't do any Cloud RAN at all.
Right.
Ericsson, I think, is talked about it a lot, but how much is actually there, I think, is not.
And do we think? I mean, I don't want to go down this tangent too much, but do we think one of the reasons Huawei doesn't do it is because it necessarily involves getting in bed with a US silicon company?
Yeah, probably. That's one of the reasons, I think. Is like that if they're going to do it on general purpose silicon, they don't really have.
I mean, they're getting better at their own silicon.
Yeah, I mean, but if Huawei was going to do a Cloud RAN product, it would have to be some kind of like Chinese general purpose processor maker doing it on RISC-V or something.
Their own Hisense or whatever.
Yeah.
Is it Hisense? Is that the brand?
Yeah, I mean, they don't really do general purpose chips, though, as I understand it. It's
right,
like custom silicon, isn't it? They do their own ASICs and all that stuff.
All right,
but,
fair enough.
I mean, who knows? Maybe they are doing some general purpose stuff. But,
yeah, they're not the most transparent company.
They don't do it, and there's still lots of arguments against it, because what's the big pitch to me, the one that I'm convinced by, is this argument that the RAN sector is very small. Can it sustain the R&D effort that goes into producing those chips year after year, or would it be better to piggyback on chips that are developed
and redirect that money onto
redirect
more radio
that money,
stuff.
and then all of a sudden, that's the argument that I'm really convinced by. But when it comes to actually putting this stuff into networks, I mean, one of the arguments on the telco side is that, you can use the silicon that's, you can use these servers that support. This is a bit like the NVIDIA argument, actually, that are supporting, your RAN compute for other things. For general sort of purpose workloads, you can use it for other stuff as well, and you can have like this single platform that supports all sorts of different workloads.
Well, that's the cloud economics thing.
RAN compute, and it does like loads of ordinary IT workloads as well. But nobody's doing that. I don't think that's happening.
No, and that's the interesting thing. So I get the general cloud narrative, which is you've got hardware resource, and due to virtualization, you basically make sure that hardware resource is being used at maximum capacity all the time, which is the most efficient use of it. You just flog it to death.
Yeah. I think that's one reason. That's one issue. There's a capacity side of stuff, but I think the other problem is it requires a re-architecting of the network. Like most RAN chips, even on the even in the sort of Verizon side of things, and you talk to someone like Orange, and they say they don't even see any need for doing this. But what you'd need to do is really sort of centralize your RAN. Like it's all at mast sites, yeah?
Yes, indeed.
And therefore, who needs to support general purpose workloads at mast sites? Like all that you do at mast sites is RAN compute.
Well, then you get people talking about inference at the edge and that sort of thing.
I'm talking about the Intel original story.
What other general purpose computing tasks would you do?
I mean, I'm equally skeptical, by the way, about this idea of AI inferencing. It's exactly the same thing. Who would want to do this sort of thing at a mast site as opposed to just doing RAN compute there?
If I'm trying my best to give them the benefit of the doubt, to not be cynical.
Yeah.
It would be, again, we're looking to the future. We're looking for a time where drones are a lot more ubiquitous. Automated vehicles on the whole are a lot more ubiquitous.
I'm disappointed in you, Scott. You start talking about remote control surgery in a minute.
I'm not advocating this. I'm steel manning the position. Yeah. And, just to antagonize you further, people wearing like AR glasses with heads-up displays that are constantly connected. All these futuristic, borderline utopian/dystopian, depending on how obsessed with the Terminator films you are.
Yeah.
Things, then you can see it a lot more. But it still comes back to that leap of faith thing. They're asking you to invest now for potential use cases a decade plus down the line.
Yeah.
And that's a tough ask in a low margin, low growth industry, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I think the similarities between the kind of AI RAN vision that NVIDIA's come out with now and what Intel and others would have been talking about with Cloud RAN a few years ago are actually massive, and people haven't picked up on this perhaps as much as...
What's massive? Say that again.
The parallel between AI RAN and the Cloud RAN.
It's just that it's in an AI context, and we, for some reason, we're in a world now where we think chucking limitless amounts of money,
Yeah.
data centers with expensive NVIDIA GPUs in, it's just always going to add up. In fact, that reminds me, let's put a pin in that. I wanted to mention a couple of Richard Windsor's newsletters, because he's looked at the financing of AI this week. But anyway, let's park that.
Yeah.
So back to the core thing. And I guess we can draw a line, unless you've got anything more to say about specifically the AI RAN thing and NVIDIA's investment in Nokia and all that. But, you know, the investment's there, and we get why they do it. It is a transactional thing.
Yeah.
They're basically going, here's some money.
I think we were talking about why we were saying that Ray and, you know, Ronnie and Co here were very sort of positive and upbeat about it. And we had sort of what they framed as cynicism, but I'd prefer to call skepticism about it. And I think if I'm going to say why I'm skeptical, I mean, for a start, I think it's nice to see someone coming along with a bold vision, and I will.
And I think that's one of the arguments in favour of it, is just disruption for its own sake, almost.
Yeah, and I think you made the point at the show, actually, that it's nice to see a company that's obviously, well, it's the biggest company in the world, and everybody's excited about it. So it's showing an interest in telecom, which has been under pressure for years. Little old us, like we're interested, we want to get in there. Justin Hotard, who's a very new CEO at Nokia, I think no one could accuse him of coming along and not really doing anything so far. He's he's been quite outspoken on certain topics geopolitically. He's done this deal with NVIDIA that's pretty massive. He's obviously trying to shake things up. He obviously wants to leave as one of those CEOs who's perhaps been a bit of a visionary rather than just a kind of manager.
Yes.
And we'll talk about one who's a manager later on when we talk about BT. He's the complete opposite as far as I'm concerned.
Right. No, you're right. And presumably the board, when they appointed him, the mandate was just fucking bring some of your silicon chops into this, because he's ex-Intel, ex-HPE.
Totally, and I like all that. I think it's really exciting. I mean, it's great to write about from a journalist perspective, and I think it's good that he's got like big, bold ideas about this. But the reason I'd be sceptical is because I think if you just look at things like where FYUZ has gone, where Intel's ended up in a way with, you know, I mean, Intel's got bigger challenges, obviously, as a business, but I'm talking specifically about the cloud RAN things, which haven't really moved as quickly as it would have.
Nearly all their attempts at diversification have
the telecom sector is very, very hard to sort of change, and there are reasons for that. And I think sometimes this idea that you can this what you were just talking about, this vision of base stations and maybe even just edge aggregation points being used for AI inference. I mean, the AI inferencing in these locations, to me, is very much, and this is another thing that was talked about a few years ago, very much a kind of reimagining of the whole edge computing story,
which has been around for a while.
You know, like let's move resources out to closer to the users. Let's have a distributed kind of,
and that has advantages in terms of things like latency.
And as far as I understand it, that's pretty much what the AI RAN thing's picking up on. I mean, the only reason that you would do inferencing at the cell edge, or as opposed to doing it in a kind of hyperscaler facility, or something that Nscale's doing, let's say. And by the way, there are loads of companies that are getting into that market. So it's not like there's a shortage of options wanting to do this sort of stuff. Is to do with latency, right? Yeah. So unless you actually find a real core need for an application that needs to be a kind of sub-millisecond or whatever it is.
Yeah, like automated vehicles.
Well, does it need? I mean, I'm trying to envisage why something like this would be needed.
If you get it back to my steel manning exercise that you were so appalled by. Let's say we've got swarms of drones buzzing around, delivering shit, doing surveillance, whatever the fuck a drone might do.
Yeah.
And they've got to be able to coexist and not bump into each other and all that sort of thing. Then there probably is quite a lot of high-level processing happening in real time, and that needs to not have a delay, because that delay could make the difference between them smashing into each other and not. Just guessing. That's
I don't know. I mean, you'd have to ask the experts, I guess. But I know when I've talked to people at telcos on this sort of topic, they're very skeptical about the need to have compute power that close to the kind of where the application's being deployed that you could get. I mean, you talk to someone like Scott Petty at Vodafone about this, you know, and they had their edge computing story, Vodafone, with AWS a few years ago. You know, the latency from Scotland to London is not actually very big. You know, it's like if you have a data center, if you have a few data centers in the UK with this sort of infrastructure deployed, is pretty much good enough to do any of these sorts of low millisecond applications that we're talking about. And now, great, if there's an opportunity that comes where we do need sub-millisecond and all of a sudden that's a core requirement, then maybe it changes the story. But it's definitely not there at the moment. And then I wonder even if it is there, here's the other concern, is how can the telcos sort of be the companies that make money from that? Which is always the perennial problem,
because certainly since the mobile broadband era started.
The basic economics to me of the AI RAN story as envisaged by NVIDIA are like difficult, you know. We were just been talking about the whole reason for TIP in the first place was to try and drive down infrastructure costs, really, like put innovation in there, inject competition in, and give
I would say, and you correct me,
you've
been to the event much more. I would have said put the innovation in one, perhaps the biggest, but one byproduct of that innovation being to drive down costs, but that's not necessarily the only reason to innovate.
No, it isn't, but they certainly want to be spending less on equipment. And if you're going to do it in Africa, which was Facebook's reason for getting in there, you definitely want lower cost equipment.
Where your ARPUs are tiny.
Yeah. You know, and they want lower equipment costs, and this is the driver to do it. And increasingly now, when we talk about things like 6G, which is a big thing with the Cohere story and actually the NVIDIA story as well,
ISAC stuff,
is how all this will sort of fit into what 6G becomes. That's not what the telcos are saying, that they want to go off and put loads of GPUs into equipment. They're talking about having something that's software upgradable, it's an evolution of 5G that doesn't require a big hardware replacement. You know, no one's saying we want to spend lots of money on expensive GPUs for base station sites or even aggregation points. And the telcos I talked to, and I talked to quite a few at FYUZ about this, and I've talked to some in advance of FYUZ about this anyway, even before Nokia had done the deal, because AI RAN was obviously being discussed as an alliance rather than as something that Nokia had, you know, specifically got into bed with NVIDIA for. They're really pretty skeptical about it. Most of the people I speak to, I don't hear anybody sort of saying unreservedly that this is a great idea, apart from perhaps, who I haven't talked to directly about it, but apart from perhaps T-Mobile US, they seem to be the kind.
Well, and they're going to say that because they're part of the announcement.
They are, but they've not committed to doing anything commercially. They've been involved in trials and everything, and they're the justification, I think, for NVIDIA and Nokia to say this is what we're doing.
NVIDIA's chucked a bit of cash at them as well.
And they're apparently supposed to be doing their field trials next year. But, you know, it's all very well for someone like John Saw, who's the CTO there, to say you need to be ambitious. And I think he came out with some quote about if someone had told me this is how you're going to use.
So he did, credit where it's due, a competitive title to us. Fierce Wireless in the States got a good early interview with this guy you were just describing, and that's where you're extracting the quotes from, isn't it?
I mean, I can't, because you were the person who told me about it, and I did read the article that I think it's Monica Allivan wrote the story.
Yeah.
And he made some analogy about, well, if people had been this skeptical about 2.5 gigahertz spectrum a few years ago, I'd never have done anything. And I thought it was a bit of a, you like the expression, it was just, well, you said straw man, I think.
Yeah. He's setting up a completely different.
It's not an appropriate argument to me, because there were lots of people who would have said that is actually quite sensible spectrum to use. I mean, you don't want to go too high up the spectrum bands and be in an area where you're spending like huge amounts of money and being.
Well, actually, to go full circle, that's one of the arguments stated in favour of this AI RAN stuff, is that as we go further up the spectrum and the spectrum, the characteristics are more challenging, then you need more compute to be able to do beamforming and other ways of optimizing it and all that. So that is one argument in favour.
Yeah, and the big problem with that is, and this is why I take issue with him sort of going on about 2.5 gigahertz spectrum, which, by the way, is pretty much the same sort of bands that we use for 3G. Is you go way up above that into the sort of bands that are being talked about for 6G, the 7 gigahertz bands and all this, and you need more compute and you need more base stations. The economic case isn't there unless the telcos suddenly have a very different business model from the one that they have now. they complain about not making an ROI with the site equipment they've got and the spectrum fees that they're already paying and the money that they're already spending on hardware with Ericsson and Nokia for equipment that doesn't imply using. I mean, the whole driver recently has been about trying to get energy costs down and trying to be as efficient as possible and, trying to squeeze costs out of this side of the business.
Yeah. That
completely turns around when you're talking about using some of this GPU equipment. Now, the only people who sort of say, oh, it stacks up well on a TCO basis are NVIDIA. Yeah, well, they would, wouldn't they?
Exactly.
I don't hear any telcos saying this is low cost stuff to deploy.
I mean, they're not even subtle about it. Every time I see a story with a Jensen Huang quote in, for those few people in the world who don't know, he's the CEO of NVIDIA. It's always, I think the most recent one was, China's going to win the AI race. So all his messaging is very unsubtly self-interested.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Good for him. I mean, it seems,
there was an FT
seems
story,
to be serving
wasn't
him
there?
pretty fucking well.
Yeah.
But it's not subtle. And so that's NVIDIA's messaging. And I even joked when I was on the call with Ronnie Vashishta, I sort of joked, look, we all know where you're coming from.
Yeah.
You want to flog more fucking GPUs.
Well, I can be even more skeptical about for me, the NVIDIA side of things with this. They want to flog more GPUs to telcos, and this to me smacks of what's happening with the funding that they've put into people like CoreWeave and OpenAI, which is they can't afford to buy GPUs anymore. Let's put a huge amount of money into them, and then
So this circular
we'll give it them
economics
with the
thing.
left hand, and then we'll receive it back in the right hand as payment for our chips.
Yeah, well, I might talk about that in a second. I mentioned the Richard Windsor stuff.
And the Nokia deal, to me, if you're going to be really critical of the Nokia deal and sort of take an extremer position on it, is that it kind of smacks of that a little bit, yeah? It's like you'd have to do quite a bit of development of your products to make sure that you have the equipment and the software that's going to work with our GPUs. And your mobile networks business group, by the way, has been in an awkward situation for a couple of years with people sort of raising questions about whether it's even going to be a going concern almost in the future. What's the solution to this? No one, by the way, is doing AI RAN, even though we've been banging on about it for ages. What's the solution to this? Why don't we just stick a load of money into it? It wouldn't surprise me next if we find out that T-Mobile is doing a deployment, but who's paying for it?
Well, quite.
NVIDIA, yeah?
Quite. And there's obviously a ton of circular economics going on in the AI world where NVIDIA's either buying stakes in companies or lending them money to then buy GPUs or whatever.
Yeah.
And there's just silly money flying around, and I want to move on to that in a sec. In fact, why don't I do it now? Because I keep deferring it. It doesn't need to be a big tangent. So a couple of things. Richard Windsor, who does Radio Free Mobile, who gets a ton of fucking free publicity out of us.
He does, yeah.
Come on a pod, Richard. Return the favour. And he writes these quite sort of punchy, sort of bullet point dominated bulletins, and presumably makes his money from more bespoke consulting behind the scenes. And so this is his way of just keeping his name out there and his sort of position as an expert out there. So at the start of the week, he had a bulletin called Artificial Intelligence Finance Debate, and his subhead was "No one cares until it's too late." And there he's talking, I mean, there's quite a lot there. I couldn't possibly begin to summarize it all. But, I think that's his way of going, yes, this is bubbly. And it's the exuberance. It's the sort of, and this is where it's reminiscent for those of us old enough to remember of the .com bubble. It was just look, this is brilliant. That all critical faculties get suspended. This is just a fucking gold rush. Go west, my son, or whatever that quote is.
Yeah.
And so he talked about that, and then I caught the other. He wrote a follow-up one today, the Bubble Debate Part 2, and he said Mr. Altman sounds more like the leader of a religion than a company CEO. And he actually speaking about something I hadn't read up on, so I'll call him out. He goes, Altman refused to answer the most relevant question he's ever been asked, and did so in such a way, this is all quoting Richard Windsor, such a way that made him appear more like the leader of a religious cult than a company CEO. On a call with an OpenAI investor, which is linked to, the investor asked Mr. Altman to justify the roughly 1.4 trillion spending commitment.
Whose commitment's that? Oh, they've committed to spend that
OpenAI on all these gigawatts of data center capacity and all that sort of thing.
They're getting the money from NVIDIA now, aren't they?
And Mr. Altman responded by offering to find the investor a buyer for his shares. In plain English, this means, and I think this is a paraphrase, not a direct quote, I'm tired of trying to justify this, so either believe what I say or there is the door. And the reason I wanted to mention that is, that we are getting some of that stuff where it's like, look, this is a big deal. It's going whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
Either get on board or fuck off.
Yeah, and that's one of my pushbacks to the NVIDIA Nokia story, I guess, is because it feels very hypey. It feels like everybody's sort of, there's a certain amount of desperation in telco anyway that's been there for a couple of years now with things not really working out as planned in 5G and everything. What can we latch onto that everybody's really excited about? Look, here's NVIDIA. Everybody else thinks it's a great idea. Why don't we kind of participate in that as well? There's a bit of that. It's almost like here's the thing that really worries me. Everybody goes, 5G was oversold and it didn't work out the way that was planned.
Yeah.
We need to not repeat that mistake with 6G. There's a danger here that we do the same thing by putting the technology ahead of why does anybody bloody need this?
Well, indeed.
You were saying, well, I'm going to provide a steel man, and here's, imagine some future where cars need this. Well, great, but let's actually have. It's the wrong order all the time. It's like build it and they will come type thing.
As opposed to find the need and then
it turns out
that need.
Build it and they will come in telecom often isn't the right approach, is it? It's like it didn't really work in 5G. The pitch with 5G in the early days was a lot of this remote control surgery bollocks and other kind of weird and wacky use cases. And 6 years on since it was first launched, nobody's doing any of this stuff. They're using it on smartphones. Telcos are complaining about ROI, and now we're talking about putting GPUs.
I think I've heard the odd anecdote
sites.
About remote surgery, but it's
I
think the problem is
a thing that one hospital's trialing.
Maybe, and but the thing is, you're right to talk about hype because it's a slow burner. Obviously, over time, we're going to get some degree of remote assistance for certainly younger surgeons, or perhaps full robotic surgery in I don't know, like military environments or something like that, where you can't get the surgeon to the front line, but you can get them remote control or something. Anyway, certain use cases like that, but it's a slow burn. The problem always is, and maybe we're overexposed to this because we're the recipients of messaging all the time. The problem is that this gets put forward as, they won't necessarily use the word, but it gets put forward in effect as a killer app, and it never is. Yeah. It's just one of many potential use cases, and what we actually have to stitch together is this whole massive ecosystem, this whole spectrum of use cases, which may or may not justify this investment in future. But anyone who's saying that if you don't accept it unconditionally now, you're a sort of Luddite, closed-minded idiot, I think that's a bit too strong.
Yeah, well, it's very strong after 25 years of telcos not really doing anything other than providing basic connectivity for people to get on the internet, and not finding another way of making money from doing that.
Well, I'll give you one validation for both of us, but more you than me, as you've written far more on it, is Open RAN itself.
Yeah.
The skepticism that we've expressed over the years on this pod, and you have, well, we both have, but you have especially in your writing, where sometimes you get accused of having some bias against it. I think pretty much most of the positions you and we have taken have been borne out, haven't they? Yeah,
well, it's funny being accused of that and then running into somebody at the show who basically made out that he used to work for one of the vendors in this area, and I won't mention him because it was one of those
it's off the record chats,
but sort of saying the whole AT&T and Ericsson thing is not really, like it doesn't really feel like it's Open RAN, and I've met quite a few people who are very skeptical about the AT&T Ericsson thing, and when you write about that and say this isn't Open RAN, you get accused of being anti-Open RAN. I'm not. I'm just saying it's not the Open RAN story we were sold. If all Open RAN is Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung doing some compatible specs, then why is that any better? What's the big advantage there? Because you've not brought competition in if it's still dominated by those players.
It does crack me up a bit, the position we're in. And by the way, actually, while I do that, I want to say that we're moving to one of the beers that Mark, the ASML expert, brought on. And I couldn't even begin to pronounce it. It's one of these Dutch words.
You call it savagery.
I just called it savagery because it's 6.5%. So we're we're having one of these 6.5% ones. So if towards the end of this pod the quality of dialogue deteriorates, then you got Mark from Holland to blame.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as journalists and as commenters and whatever, we're in an interesting position because I know that people value our objective position. I know people value this podcast, and they know, and one of it is authenticity. They know that what we're saying is what we really mean and what we really think, for better or worse. But every now and then, it doesn't happen that often, and I think it happens more often to you than to me because you tend to write more consequential journalism than I do. Someone will have a little hissy fit, and it'll mainly be because what you wrote is professionally inconvenient for them. But to me, that's not reason enough to have a moan.
Yeah.
If it's inaccurate or if it's libelous or whatever, that's another matter. If all you've done is put forward a considered opinion that's awkward for them, well, they just got to deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the messaging on Open RAN's changed, hasn't it? I think you heard that at this event to some extent, probably, that people are sort of pitching it now as it wasn't really about injecting competition into the market. It was more about innovation and
that's been the pivot in the narrative.
Yeah. Well, okay, I'll take that, but that's not Open RAN then, is it? That's something else. If the innovation's still coming from, I mean, maybe the idea was to give Ericsson and Nokia and Samsung a kick up the backside, and if you don't, if you don't do what we want, then we won't use you. We'll use smaller players. But I find that a bit hard to buy, really, because it's not as though any of those companies really came along and looked like they were viable.
And it seems like the economics of mixing and matching the components within the RAN just don't really add up. I mean, was it Neil McRae years ago said he wants fewer vendors, not more? Yeah,
I mean, I can see if you look at Open RAN in a really broad sense to include things like Cloud RAN and Virtual RAN and stuff we've just been talking about sort of general purpose silicon as opposed to custom silicon, as well as all the sort of open interfaces and all that. I guess the things I'm convinced by, and this is why I don't think I am an Open RAN skeptic, is because I've just said I see why you'd want to maybe pivot from using custom silicon, and take advantage of a much bigger pool of R&D. Yeah. I get the economic
and
argument.
Refocus on your core competence.
Refocus, but just take advantage of a platform that's being used for lots of other things, and where a lot more money's going into this technology, and you're going to be able to take advantage of all that innovation that's going into it and process changes, and you're at the head of the queue whenever TSMC's like prioritizing customers because they're the same chips that are being sold for basic servers and all this. I get that, and I kind of get I sort of get this sort of avoidance of margin stacking argument with it a little bit as well. It's like we say the market's worth 35 billion a year, which I think are Omdia's numbers, but I'm guessing that's just based on what Ericsson and Nokia and Huawei and Samsung and other RAN vendors are kind of selling, and you tot it all up. But you've obviously got someone like Marvell Technology making silicon and then selling it to Nokia, and then they add a bit onto that basically when they've incorporated it into their products. Mm-hmm. And there's an argument that if the telcos just went out directly to the component suppliers and bought from them, they avoid paying those extra costs that get built in by the systems integrators. But it doesn't work that way, does it? They're not talking about doing it to that kind of micro level anyway. They're still talking about you get your baseband from somebody which has got those chip technologies built into it anyway, and you get your radio units from someone else. And okay, there's maybe still a little bit of margin stacking going on there if Ericsson's dealing directly with Fujitsu and bringing its products in, and someone can go out to Fujitsu and avoid that. I guess I get that a little bit, but I think it's probably undermined a bit, but exactly by what Neil was talking about, is that when you start to deal with multiple suppliers and then you've got to do the systems integration work yourself, you end up putting that cost back in.
Presumably people like Ericsson do a great job of saying if you buy everything with us, the cost per individual component goes down because you're getting a full solution.
Which is the most compelling argument of all, because they're designing the same kinds of products for loads of customers over the world, And you look at their profit margins, by the way, it's not, well, actually, they've gone up a lot recently, but it's not like...
that's due to streamlining.
You maybe look at some of the other... We look at Nokia, certainly, and its mobile networks business group is really challenged in terms of what it's making.
Yeah.
It's not like you could never accuse them of, based on what they're doing at the profitability level, of overcharging customers.
Indeed.
So
yeah. Well, we need to move on to one or two other items. I mean, as I thought we would, our discussion of FYUZ sort of went off in that sort of NVIDIA Nokia direction a fair bit.
Yeah. So
let's just sum up FYUZ itself. I mean, for me, the first one I've been to, while it's called FYUZ, unlike you, I really enjoyed it. It was small. It was just in one sort of medium-sized exhibition space. The keynotes didn't particularly blow me away. It was there was nothing that as a journalist I thought there's a story in that, but I've got to admit,
there was one which we're coming on to in a minute.
Okay, cool, great.
Yeah.
Well, then that's cool. But that's not to slag them off. I'm just saying it's an event of a size. It's like it reminds me a little bit of DTW, but smaller. Do you know what the footfall for DTW is? How many people turn up to
5,000.
Right, so there we are, and this was sub 1,000.
Yeah.
And there's pros and cons. I mean, my headline, which I wrote, which I've heard that they quite liked, I just called it "Small but Mighty."
Yeah.
And we've already touched on one of the many advantages of these smaller trade shows is the sort of serendipitous networking. And this is when I chatted to Christian Toivo, is that how you pronounce his name? Who runs FYUZ. Firstly, he sort of reiterated that pivot towards, we're talking just more general open than Open RAN. But he also said that the event has evolved into more of a networking thing.
Yeah.
Now, this could have been his way of making the best of the fact that it does seem to be shrinking, certainly in terms of the money behind it. Again, if we take the lunch as any barometer.
Yeah.
But I will give him the fact that I found the networking part of it really useful. I loved the fact that I chatted to so many people. You were just bumping into people all the time. And then we had hanging out at the Ferryman pub after, and that was all cool. So on the whole, it was a positive experience, but I can see why people who had to schlep a bit further than we did might wonder whether the ROI is there.
Yeah, I mean, I like the networking side of it, and I think for certain people in this area, they feel it's important to be out and to talk about this kind of stuff. But in terms of it really moving the industry on in the way it was pitched to be doing into 2018, 2019, I think there's a sense it's becoming a bit irrelevant. I'm not sure. My headline, if I had to rewrite yours, might have said it's mighty small rather than small and mighty. But it's kind of, I think that TIP does some important stuff.
How big it is
I mean, there's certainly people who value what they do on the disaggregation side when it comes to things like open optical networking, and they've got this thing called Open LAN, which is about Wi-Fi. Yep. And they've got a new initiative, which I covered in the thing that I wrote about it, to do with what they're doing in the video area to kind of improve quality of experience, basically. It's been quite, like Meta might deal with BT, for instance, about the to make sure that the video services that Meta's pushing over the BT network are as efficient as possible. But it's not done in a very kind of standardized industry-wide manner. It's all quite bilateral. And if they can come up with a kind of common approach to that, then maybe it could lead to some improvements. And I think things like that are really useful and important, probably. But in terms of the industry kind of making a big impact through this sort of stuff, I don't see it anymore.
I think they're involved. I think I asked Christian this. I think they're on the board, or they're at some kind of level. But I'd almost rather see NVIDIA chuck some money at things like TIP than at vendors.
Well, maybe they will. Who knows?
I understand why they'd want to chuck it at Nokia, because now Nokia, and by the way, Nokia's now got itself in a position where it feels like it's made a bit of a Faustian pact.
Yeah.
Because people, even companies like NVIDIA, don't give you $1 billion and not expect some shit in return.
Well, I think the Faustian pact is only that they'll be very much geared to or incentivized to do NVIDIA development. And therefore it raises questions about, I mean, I think this is someone that nobody's been asking enough personally. And I've put it in my pieces a couple of times, but the mainstream 5G products that Nokia does, and that Ericsson does, and that Samsung does, and that Huawei does, like, what happens to that with this NVIDIA investment? You know, they're already challenged in terms of what they can spend on R&D at their mobile units as it was compared with some of the big competitors they have. They've got this injection of cash from NVIDIA, but does it all of a sudden mean that the mainstream stuff they're doing kind of takes lower precedence now?
Yeah, good question.
And if customers don't want, by the way, the NVIDIA stuff, this is a risk to Nokia, I would say, and they're putting all the funding now into doing GPU type stuff. And it turns out that telcos really aren't buying this, and what they want is
literally aren't buying it.
They're literally not buying it, and what they really want is just those mainstream 5G products. That
it could set them back even further.
Then
yeah, I mean, I guess they would ask that, maybe they would answer that this billion's a completely separate thing, and you know, someone I chatted to confirmed that it was a fresh billion, because I remember when we were chatting in the pub, I was trying to get my head around whether or not this represented an injection of cash, because you know, if you just buy someone's shares, you know, buying them on the open market, you're not giving money to that company.
Yeah.
I suppose by buying them, you're putting upwards pressure on the share price, but that's the only way. But anyway, this is apparently a fresh issue of shares, so it's dilutive to existing shareholders. And it was a fresh billion, so I had that question answered.
Yeah.
But yeah, they might argue that, look, we're just spending that billion on this GPU stuff, and all the shit we were always going to do before, we're still doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's their line.
Yeah.
But you'd still think, but given that they're, as I say, R&D challenged anyway and not profitable at mobile networks, and there's question marks about, the question for them was, do they need to put more money into just what they're doing now to make it better? The mainstream 5G and 6G development based on custom silicon, based on the platforms that are more widely accepted. If, like, the funding injection, a funding injection of $1 billion to put into those products,
great,
might be great, but if the funding injection goes into GPUs, and by the way, what happens to the Marvell technology platform, it might leave them in a bit of a precarious position. I mean,
if we had Justin Hotard in this room now, just asking him the question of what strings are attached to that billion would be a fascinating one to hear the answer to, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I'd just like to know if you know, because this is the other issue, is that they're now, it's like contradiction almost in what they've sort of pitched, I think, in the last few years. They've been very keen not to have a kind of fork in the road with their kind of 5G software development, their RAN software development, and to keep everything on a kind of single track. And they've even built their cloud RAN strategy around this. It's one of the reasons they didn't want to use kind of Intel general purpose processors.
Mm-hmm.
And have to sort of develop stuff for x86, but try and keep as much of that layer one on the Marvell chips that they're using for both purpose-built and Cloud RAN. All of a sudden now they've got these GPUs there, and they've got this kind of two-track approach to 5G and 6G software development, yeah? And I think that's going to be quite a hard one for them to kind of navigate with customers, is that, you know, if you go and get the NVIDIA stuff, you get this sort of thing. If you go and get the legacy stuff, it's this, and maybe it's not as good anymore because there's not as much money going into it. It's quite a difficult one, I think, to get around. That to me is the biggest risk to them, I would say.
I think that's a good point on which to pivot. I'll throw it back to you again. You said there was one thing that came from the keynotes and the presentations and the stuff we saw at the event that you thought was newsworthy, and from which, I mean, you wrote something about it.
Right.
So why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was a session on the morning of day 2. Give a shout out to Raylan Matra, our old boss, who's now at Telecom TV, because he was moderating
it. Right,
that. Yeah. And it always looked like the most interesting session anyway, really, because it was a bunch of like telcos and vendors talking about Open RAN. And the newsy bit, it's interesting, like 2019 when I went to TIP, and Iago Tenorio, who's now CTO at Verizon, stood up. He was at Vodafone at the time and announced this kind of the tender we were just talking about, the Vodafone 100,000, then increased to 170,000 site tender that's only just sort of had the results this year. Deutsche Telekom sort of did the same thing on a slightly smaller scale. by announcing this plan to build sort of 30,000, have a tender for 30,000 sites outside Germany, which
Right.
I think if you look at their numbers,
Where else does DT operate? Off the top of your head, or major markets?
Slovakia, Hungary, Czech Republic.
So a lot of Central Europe.
Like loads. There's like
Right.
10 countries in Europe, basically. Greece,
I mean, I should have known
Romania,
that. There we go.
Austria, like there's loads. There's like Croatia.
So they got Central Europe covered.
But if you look at, I mean, obviously a lot of those are quite small markets. I think if you look at the number of RAN sites in their Capital Markets Day presentation they gave last year, they had a figure of about 45,000 sites in total across all those markets outside Germany.
Mm-hmm.
30,000 is obviously like a big chunk of that, yeah? And I couldn't get from them where exactly, which countries were included. I mean, they very much just pitched it as an outside Germany thing. But it sounds like it's most of the base outside Germany that they're looking at, and they're talking about doing it in January is when they kind of kick this process off. An RFQ in January will be issued. It's components based, by which they pretty much mean it needs to be Open RAN compatible. They want to do everything on looking at individual bits and pieces and making sure that they interoperate with each other. So you need to be compliant with ORAN aligned specifications.
Compatible and compliant. Yeah. A good relationship.
Yeah. And then it's like, well, where's this come from all of a sudden? What's the need for it now? I mean, their pitch is that it's to do with modernisation. And I can buy that to some extent. I mean, it's 2026 nearly, like the first wave of 5G products are being rolled out, in 2019, 2020? Like, you might want to take advantage of some new features. You might feel that it's time in some of these markets for a bit of a refresh, but I wonder whether some of this has got to do with the kind of geopolitics as well. Right. The kind of Huawei story. And it was interesting that the guy who talked about it on stage, a guy called Thomas Lips, who's head of RAN disaggregation, but I think also interestingly now head of I think he's like the ORAN Alliance chair at the moment.
Okay.
So that's the Specs group. He was, I thought it was interesting him sort of talking about it in the context of what they've done in Germany so far, where they've brought Nokia in as a kind of third vendor. So for a long time, Deutsche Telekom's basically had Ericsson and Huawei doing all of its RAN equipment. Ericsson covers about a third of the network and Huawei covers the other 2/3. And they've brought Nokia in as a kind of third vendor in the last year to do a site replacement of Huawei, basically, across about 3,000 sites. So it's a decent chunk, maybe a tenth of the network, and a bigger share of what Huawei's doing, clearly. They're basically swapping out Huawei and putting Nokia in, and they're doing it with ORAN Alliance specs. There's some Fujitsu involved in the mix, and the question is, why are you doing this? And I think it's all to do with concern that Germany's now on a kind of pretty much let's get Huawei out of the network.
Yeah, well, so any time Huawei's swapped out, you don't have to be the biggest conspiracy theorist to think is geopolitics at play.
Yeah, and I guess here's the thing: is why would you only swap? Why would you only do 3,000 sites? Why would you, if you're not happy with Huawei, and you've been, by the way, for years and years and years, you've only had a two-vendor strategy. And it used to be, by the way, Nokia and Huawei, and they took Nokia out in about 2018 and switched to Ericsson because they weren't very happy with Nokia at the time. All of a sudden, they seem to love Nokia. So the message from Thomas Lips on stage,
and some of that we can put Nokia raising its game.
Some of that put Nokia raising its game, but great PR for Nokia, by the way, to have Thomas Lips on stage saying that what we're getting from Nokia is on a par with or better than, that's a direct quote, than Huawei. He didn't say Huawei, he said than the supplier we're swapping out, but the supplier they're swapping out is Huawei. So
yeah, exactly, that's the quote. We are getting better quality. We are getting a quality that is on par with and better than. I mean, you can't have it both ways, mate. It's either
I think he probably meant or, but
the supplier that we're swapping out is your quote in your piece.
But the supplier they're swapping out is Huawei. Deutsche Telekom's confirmed that themselves. So it's great publicity for Nokia, and I kind of think if they're happy that Nokia is that competitive and that they can do this with ORAN aligned specifications, that gives them the confidence maybe to move ahead. And there's a lot of concern, I think, about like EU regulations and tightening of them to be sort of tougher on Huawei. And Germany.
And you wonder whether there's back-channel messaging from the EU. So we haven't announced anything yet, but if I were you, I'd fucking get in line.
Well, and also there's loads of developments going on in Germany this week, like even today, in fact. Like 2 reports in German newspapers this morning about what's going on in terms of their approach to Huawei.
Oh, is it? Right.
Bloomberg reported in the last few days. Gillian, who we know at Bloomberg, reported on Germany's government considering paying the operators to remove Huawei. The document that I've been reading this morning and trying to get my head around, which is 150 pages, basically is a Federal Network Agency revision of how they would treat the radio access network. So here is the big argument in Germany, which Deutsche Telekom and its boss Timotheus Hertges very much liked a few years ago and would throw out at conferences when they were challenged on why you're using Huawei's radio access network equipment when it's a security threat, is that he'd come back and he'd go, well, under law, it's not considered to be a critical element of the network. The core is a critical element, but the radio access network
tried that in the UK, didn't we? And then Trump shouted at
but that's
Bojo.
Yeah, but this is different from the UK.
Oh, okay,
obviously.
Right.
Because the UK changed their mind, but Germany's always had this thing.
Is the concept similar to how we tried to hedge it before we changed our mind?
Well, there's not been any hedging because the German approach is that under German legislation it's not a critical element.
Okay.
But in this document that's out at the moment, so what they did about a year ago is they came out with this legislative changes that said you have to get Huawei out of the core by the end of 2026 because that's a critical element. Which I think most of them already done anyway. And by the end of 2029, you have to swap out Huawei's management system because that's a critical element. But if you do that, you can keep the rest of Huawei's RAN. And therefore, this has triggered this kind of move.
But the Yanks don't like that.
Well, I don't know what the Yanks think, but Germany doesn't like it turns out anymore because
right.
the German telcos went off and then started developing their own sort of service management and orchestration systems to sort of use with Huawei's technology. This week, the Federal Network Agency just come out with a big document that basically proposes treating the whole of the RAN as a critical element. And the implications of that are massive because then all of a sudden...
I didn't know any of this.
Yeah.
Right.
So the headline really, which isn't out yet because I haven't put the story up, but it will probably be up on light reading by the time this gets published, is
Monday
that Germany's pretty much moving closer to a formal Huawei ban.
Right.
I think.
Which is pretty big deal.
And I'm not saying this is going to happen imminently. There'll no doubt be pushback. It's a consultation document. There'll be all sorts of... It sounds like Germany is one of the most bureaucratic places there is. We like to think they're all really efficient. And
no, I believe you.
But but it sounds like there's loads of hoops to jump through and all this crap. And,
all of Europe's. I mean, I've got my prejudices against the EU as a bureaucracy, but Europe is very... I mean, this is one of the interesting things, if you'll indulge this brief tangent. Chatting to some people at FYUZ, including people like Ray and Ronnie from Cohere, you're sort of reminded of some of the cultural... that Dutch one we just had some balls, didn't it? We're going to know about that later on. So what we've got left is a wingman or a lager.
I'll have a lager.
Yeah, you take that. I'll take the wingman. You're sometimes reminded of cultural differences between the US and Europe, especially when it comes to business. So we're aware of other cultural differences, and I always think. In fact, this is one of the chats we're having with Michael from Huawei, which it was all off the record, so I'm not going to reveal any details. But stuff that wasn't to do with telecoms that we got into was just talking about the various relationships between the UK, Canada, and the US. And basically, the two countries in the world that are closest to the US culturally are Canada and the UK, aren't they?
Yeah.
And so we have this funny relationship with them. But in terms of business, compared to pretty much all of Europe, as far as I'm concerned, the US is harder working and it's more dynamic and more risk taking and more buccaneering, and just more committed to making money and innovating and all that sort of thing. And that's to their credit. And one of the trade-offs we do, I was having this chat with our colleague Teresa when I was in Paris with her. One of the trade-offs we do is, we do have a slower pace of life. But we arguably have a nicer sort of standard of living. We spend more time having lunches and having a natter, and we have holidays. Try and get anything done in France in August, and you're out of luck because they were on holiday.
Yeah.
And,
who
and
wants
it's a
to work
trade-off.
all the time and have 3 days holiday a year?
Well, indeed. And
How's that an improvement in quality of life?
Well, it's a trade-off, isn't it? And it seems that America, to generalise massively about this enormous, diverse country, they're prepared to have less leisure time in order to be more industrious. And fair enough, that's a choice.
Yeah.
I think most people who've listened to this pod for a while can guess which side of that equilibrium I tend to rest on. But yes, I thought that was just a very interesting thing that I took from it. I can't remember what got me onto this tangent. It's something we were just talking about.
I don't know either, because we were talking about Huawei and German security regulations.
Oh no, you were talking about bureaucracy and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know, and this is an area in which I will support sort of American views. We're too bureaucratic, we're too slow moving, we're too encumbered. I noticed there was a bit of news this week that the EU's thinking of dialing down some of its AI bureaucracy and regulation, for fear of being left behind.
Yeah.
And so this is where I'll be pro-American, is like, do strip away some layers of bureaucracy. Yes, it's basically an equilibrium. It's between safety and freedom. And we go too far towards safety, and maybe the Americans sometimes arguably go too far towards freedom, i.e. things aren't regulated enough or whatever. But I think we could do with going a bit more in the yank direction when it comes to that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, you were saying as well that you think there's probably been pressure from America on Germany to do some of this. Maybe that's behind the clampdown.
Of course there will be. Whether or not that's decisive is another matter.
Yeah.
But Americans, I mean, every now and then, they used to, years ago, they'd threaten to withdraw from like intelligence sharing agreements.
Yeah, I mean,
I
don't think it's as overt as it was in the first Trump administration at the moment.
No.
It's not like you see Mike Pompeo on his tour of Europe meeting politicians and it's all being reported on. And I actually think they probably feel that there isn't the same need for that, because I think there's just enough concern within Europe nowadays about China. Yeah, I mean, not to say
as a sort of geopolitical challenge.
Yeah, I mean, and at the same time, by the way, there's a lot of concern within Europe about America, but I think there's a desire within Europe to have, and this is where this whole sovereignty thing comes from. Yeah, this idea of like being a more sovereign nation technologically and having control over our own sort of destiny and taking technologies that we're happy with. I think a lot of this anti-Huawei stuff it's probably a bit more kind of homegrown than it was during the first time around. I just think there's a lot of the opposition, I think, to what the current government's doing probably comes from within Germany at the moment rather than America. I think it's just become quite controversial politically, and a lot of the German press, and I get sent some of this stuff by people that I know, is really kind of quite critical of the whole kind of equivocation over Huawei and this whole the whole thing last year.
Just like shit or get off the pot sort of
Well,
thing.
the thing last year that I think got badly reported when they said you need to remove it from the core and you need to remove it from the management system of the RAN by the end of 2029. And I think certain publications took it as this is a sign that Germany's banning Huawei by 2029. It wasn't.
Right.
And it's interesting being on a call with Ericsson for their earnings and Ecom sort of having to put equity analysts right on this. It's like they're not being banned, by the way. They're allowed to stay in after 2029 is pretty much what he said.
Okay.
But I think the German government deliberately tried to get this news out and make it like the language that was used until you read the small print kind of thing and went through it. It was quite confusing. It was kind of hard to figure out exactly what they were doing. Maybe they're banning Huawei, and the press doesn't think about it enough. And
Germany has long been, and I think I had conversations like this over in Dublin, has long been in a precarious position, and we characterise it in maybe an over-reductive way, but they want to flog beamers to China.
Yeah.
And China, as far as I can tell, to characterise China, not the Chinese people, but the Chinese leadership.
Yeah.
And the Chinese political presence in the world, they can come over as quite vindictive and quite thin-skinned and take offence easily. And so if you do something like banning Huawei, there's likely to be all sorts of secondary consequences regarding your political and economic relationship with China. And so Germany, for I don't know, at least I would say I was going to say about a decade. Certainly, ever since Huawei became a proxy for US's sort of geopolitical tussle with China, has been really stuck in the middle. Because they are probably, I think I looked at the data a little while, but I might have even done it on a pod. But they are, I think, by far the biggest European exporter into China.
Well, they are the biggest exporter into China, 90 billion last year, and about 90 billion of imports from China as well.
So there's a hell of a lot of economic activity.
Yeah. Do you know what Timotheus Högis, who's DT CEO, said at a conference 2 years ago when he was asked about banning like Huawei and whether they should take it out of all the antennas and all that stuff?
Yeah.
First thing he said is, under German legislation, it's not considered to be a critical element. Well, that might be changing soon, I'm afraid, Tim. And the other thing he said, which you'll love, was, I believe that it is not a wise recommendation because we should manage the interdependencies of industries.
Yes.
I just believe that banning an antenna would have consequences for other industries sitting here, in this room, which are trying to sell their products into China.
There we go. Yeah, well, and that's all totally rational.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't necessarily...
It is rational, but I tell you what it does. It gives ammunition to the critics who are going to go, the only reason Germany doesn't want to ban China is because they're putting their own economic interests ahead of national security considerations.
But that's my point. I don't even think that's a criticism. I think that's a perfectly rational, reasonable thing to do. And the only reason they're thinking about it is because the Yanks are leaning on them.
But the critics, I'll bring John Strand into this because to me this plays into the reason that Europe and the European Union considers China to be a higher risk vendor has nothing to do with economics. Their whole concern is that in the event of a worsening of relations between Europe and China, that the position of this company, they're exposed, and that you don't want China to be involved in your economy. In the same way we didn't really want Russia to be involved in our gas markets.
The difference is China's a much more vibrant economy than Russia ever has been. If you have
a CEO of a major German corporation coming out and saying, well, it's all about the economy, isn't it? We shouldn't really... I don't think it looks very good. It doesn't... It almost buoys those critics of why we should be, not using Huawei. I think, to be honest with you.
Look, there's coherent, well-formed arguments on both sides.
I'm not saying, by the way, I'm on either side.
No, you're steel manning as well.
Yeah.
And I'll just reiterate the bad taste it leaves in my mouth that it has to be so adversarial. That we have to set them up, and maybe they are. Maybe they are sitting there twirling their moustaches, planning an invasion of Taiwan or whatever.
Yeah.
I just don't like this sort of bellicose. They're the baddies, we're the goodies. You're either on our team, you're on their team. You got, it's all a bit binary. It's all a bit tense.
Yeah.
And maybe it's justified. Maybe I'm just naive, and I should just look facts in the face and go, it's inevitable that there will be escalations in hostility between the Chinese sphere of influence and the US sphere of influence.
I think it's inevitable after this week. And by the way, it's not just Germany. There were some rules that came out in Finland, or another consultation document rather. Surprisingly, Finland still uses Huawei.
Quite a lot, you'd think they'd be all in on Nokia.
Yeah, you would. But surprisingly, Finland still uses Huawei equipment, and the Finnish regulator came out with a really similar document about the treatment of the RAN as a critical element. And I noticed that they'd opened it up to comments from Ericsson, Nokia and Huawei, and they're published on their website. So I went and had a look at them earlier on today, and Huawei's obviously gone, we don't consider the RAN to be a critical... Well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Because
they're going to defend their position.
Because they're going to defend their position economically. But it's quite interesting sort of seeing what's going on at the moment. But I think Huawei's position personally, and I said this about 2 years ago on this podcast, I think, that they won't be around in a few years' time. And they've actually still got...
In the West.
In the West. They've still got a massive amount of the RAN stuff that's done in Europe, but I really do see, unless
see the writing on the wall.
The writing's on the wall over the next few years. They're gone. They're gone. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to move on to our final segment, but I'm going to have a quick break before we do that. Okay, we're back in the room. So, final segment. Again, I might pass it to you because we covered it, but I didn't personally write it. I've only written a couple of things this week. I've had loads of other editory things going on. So this is one advantage. I'm sure I've said this before on the pod to people listening. Ian's pretty much a pure play writer, aren't you? I know you are a manager, you do have a team, but you get to spend, I would say, 90% plus time researching and writing, probably. Whereas I'm going to be 50 max.
Yeah.
So that's my way of excusing the fact that I'm a shitter journalist than you. So and leading up to you covered BT's quarterlies yourself this week, whereas we covered it as a title, but I didn't write it myself. So I will once more defer to you, mate. What did you get from BT's quarterly announcement?
I mean, their share price went up. They did quite well afterwards, and I think the general investor take on Alison Kirkby, who I think took over in sort of February last year, has been like really positive.
And people, she's got a good reputation in terms of people talking about her as an individual. She's quite highly respected, I think.
Yeah, so I think if I was to give an assessment of her, I think she came in after somebody who left a bit of a bad smell lingering in the offices after him. Philip Janssen.
Too much curry at lunchtime.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was, from what I've heard, he was perceived to be less of a kind of like meet and greet type guy, a bit aloof, always turned up to the office, a bit distant. Made some comments that unfortunately got picked up by the press at the time and sort of written about in a way that made him out to be someone who was quite antagonistic towards the altnets and almost trying to drive them out of business. If you remember the whole Anna Gross at the FT story about they'll regret what they're doing or something.
Right, I remember that was a big fuss one Mobile World Congress.
Yeah, and I think it was, personally, I think that was more of a style rather than substance problem.
Yeah,
it's not
is it one that we spoke about on the pod and I wasn't totally in love with the angle that was taken by the FT.
Well, I in that respect, I'd agree with you that I don't think that BT was necessarily doing anything. I mean, they're not doing anything different now, by the way. So here's what I'd say about Alison Kirkby is that I don't really think BT's share price, by the way, should say, but since she came in, has gone up 70%.
Can't argue that.
It's still down massively on where it was in 2015, 2016.
Right.
And it's probably never going to get back up to that level again. But her whole strategy to me doesn't seem very different from Philip Janssen's strategy. You know, he sort of came in after an era where they bid under this flamboyant character called Gavin Patterson, who looked like he should probably have been running along a beach with a
well, we used to call him David Hasselhoff, didn't we?
Yeah, rather than managing a telco, and he'd taken them off
far too pretty to be a telecom CEO.
Far too flamboyant, far too into football and spending money on TV rights and doing all.
By the way,
I'm
just realising, having said that, I'm not making any comment about the looks of any other telecom CEO.
No, she's refocused the business. I think Philip Janssen refocused the business really to sort of think about fibre and broadband infrastructure under pressure, it should be said, from regulators and companies coming into the market that were sort of taking advantage of the fact that BT wasn't really moving on the rollout of high-speed broadband. So you had this influx of investment coming in a few years ago, people like City Fibre, but a whole load of other companies, some of whom we've had on the podcast in the past.
Yeah.
And BT obviously had to respond to that, and that strategy was scoped out and defined in much detail by Philip Janssen. Let's reach 25 million homes by the end of 2026, and then consider doing more after that. Let's be a more UK focused business. Let's not think so much about all these TV markets. And all Alison Kirkby's really done is continue that strategy, but do it in a more efficient way. And I think that's really what she is. She's just a really good manager. She's had this reputation, I think, at the companies she's been at before, which were Telia and Tele2, as I understand it, of being quite good at cost cutting and running a tight ship, but also doing it in a way that it's interesting. Like if Janssen had tried to be as aggressive as she sounds sometimes on the cost front, and when it comes to talking about job cuts, I suspect he'd have been presenting more as a kind of ruthless figure, whereas she seems to be able to, with a kind of Scottish female charm, she seems to be able to get away with.
Yeah, and I've met her briefly. Yeah, I haven't got to know her, but she's definitely good at interacting with people.
She's very likeable. She's got really good like personal skills, as I call it. I don't really like the expression, but yeah, and
or even worse, interpersonal skills.
Yeah, and she's and I think that's why she's sort of been able to charm people in a way that he hasn't, and push forward quite dramatic.
Yeah, I never met Janssen ever,
because she's really been super aggressive on cuts. I mean, if you look at, one of the headlines, I think that not only, I kind of alluded to this in my headline, but I didn't put the figure in there, but some of the mainstream press did, was another 5,000 jobs have gone at BT since March. they've cut something like 15,000 jobs since she took over, or certainly in the last couple of years.
Right.
And her target
headcount of what?
So they're on at the moment. They're on a roughly, I think it's sort of somewhere between 85 and 90 in terms of like full-time employees.
Double figure.
And they're trying to get down, including contractors, which accounts for a few, like quite a bit more actually, because they're using contractors obviously for things like fibre build out. They're looking to get down to somewhere between 75 and 90 by 2030, which implies, if you look at it where they started with when they came out with that announcement, it's a job cut of about 50,000. Basically, it's massive.
Wow.
It's potentially going down from 130,000 to 75,000, right?
Well, that's massive.
And so there's two reasons for this. One is, once you've built the fibre networks across the UK that are going to be the successor to copper, and they're going to be in place for 100 years, they're saying, another 100 years.
No one's suggesting a new substrate over fibre.
That's done, and therefore we don't need all those people that were doing it. And the other reason is just more automation and use of AI. And she's been really, like, they don't shy away from saying AI is going to result in job cuts at BT these days.
Well,
Operators used to be quite...
It kind of gets boring when they skirt around it.
They're quite happy just to sort of throw out the AI efficiencies, cost savings. So those are the two factors. Now, the problem results-wise is that there's no sales growth. They're operating in a market where... These to me are the problems with her strategy, is that there's no new growth story. There's no vision of how BT makes more money. The whole driver towards profits is coming through. We don't need as many staff, and we can be more energy efficient, and we can shut down the PSTN.
It feels a bit like managed decline, doesn't it?
It does a little bit. It's like you're keeping shareholders happy just by saying we don't need to spend as much in future, and we don't need as many people to do stuff. But their profits, their revenues have gone down their annual revenues in the last few years have gone down by about 15%, 3.7.
Yeah. So your headline was BT hacks into headcount as broadband losses continue. Yeah. Our headline was BT revenue slips as Openreach broadband losses mount. So very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the broadband losses, just to go on to that point, I mean, and this is the reason they're doing it. This is the reason they're building fibre, which I said, before there was regulatory pressure to do it, but you also had this wave of altnets coming in. BT's done a pretty good job, I think, of defending its they've had to build fibre really quick. Fibre like fury, I think, was the expression that Philip Jansen came out with. We need to roll it out really fast, and the reason for that is if they don't roll it out really fast, someone else is going to get there first, and you're not going to have as big a broadband market.
Bit of a gold rush.
And what's happening at the moment, which was always predictable, is that they are losing some customers to people like City Fibre
because it's a healthy competitive market.
Well, it's not that healthy. They're losing.
Okay.
They've lost 1.8 million, I think. I looked at the numbers in the last couple of years. It's about 9% of BT's broadband customer base. I mean, if it carries on, they're going to be a lot smaller than they used to be. And that's the reason they're having to invest heavily in this infrastructure and try and get it out.
Do we have any sense of who's the main beneficiary of these losses?
Well, it'll just be a mixture of these other altnets that are coming in. I mean, I imagine quite a lot of it's companies using City Fibre infrastructure. Some of it will be VMO2, and then you get the other ones like the All Points Fibre. We had Ronan on, didn't we, recently? And Giga. I mean, there's so many of these names, but you add
Giga in it.
A lot of them. It's probably little bits here and there, but you add it all up, and it comes to a number that's obviously chipping into BT to some extent, or Openreach as they prefer it to be referred to, because they like to sort of distance themselves from that.
Yeah, because they're definitely separate.
Definitely separate. But I think she's done a good job of managing it all. She just doesn't have a vision of where it goes beyond. Let's say everything works out for her really well. And by 2030, and she might not be there by then anyway, because you have to be like CEO for a really long time. But their free cash flow is going to go up a lot. Their projection is it's about 1.5 billion at the moment each year. It's going to be about 3 billion if all works out, because you cut so many jobs. You're not spending all this money on fibre rollout. You've taken out the PSTN, you've taken out some of these old platforms. You're a much more profitable company. Your revenues probably aren't any higher. That's just basically flattish revenue development. And then what's next? You're a UK-based company. Well, you've withdrawn from a lot of your international stuff. You're not as big in TV anymore as you used to be. What's the next chapter for BT?
Well, it's a really good question. It kind of goes full circle, and we're getting towards a time where we're going to have to wrap up. back to our FYUZ chat about the innovation and what's next, and all that sort of thing. And, and it always leaves us, well, I'll speak only for myself, it leaves me in a slightly awkward situation because my profession, my expertise, such as it is all based around telecoms.
Yeah.
And obviously we're only ever going to call it as it is. We're not going to propagandize or say things we don't mean. But yeah, it does still feel stuck in this sort of rut of like, where's the next thing? Where's the next growth? Where's the increased margin outside of salami slicing overheads and all that sort of thing? And I guess full circle, that's where I try to be as receptive as possible to the more utopian, if everything gets virtualized and cloudified, then all kinds of good shit will come from it. Back to some of the ways in which we're characterizing some of the arguments earlier on in this pod, people are going, well, something's got to change, so you might as well go with this. Yeah. It's what sort of political revolutionaries say. Is like they say, are you happy with how things are now? No. Well, then why not try fucking communism or something?
Yeah.
Not that I'm equating this to communism, but you know what I mean?
GPUs and communism.
Yeah. No, pretty far from it. But, radical transformation versus incremental transformation. Yeah. And I get the argument. The only problem is with radical transformation is you're not going to bring people along with you. The only two ways in which radical transformation happens...
Usually.
Say that again?
Lots of them die as well, usually.
Well, there tends to be some collateral damage from revolutions, doesn't there? The only two things that make radical transformation happen are an incredibly compelling argument in its favour, or the status quo is so catastrophic that you just think, fuck it, I'll give anything a go.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. And the telecoms industry is always stuck between those two things. It's never a catastrophe. It's a best managed decline, to coin a phrase. But then again, no one ever seems to quite make the sufficiently compelling case in favour of radical change. Anyway, so we're going to have to wrap up in a second. Do you have any thoughts on that, or if you want to talk any more about the BT stuff before we call it a night?
Yeah. The radical change, which is the Nokia kind of NVIDIA vision, that's maybe the most interesting that's happened in telecom in the last few months.
While, yeah.
Probably, maybe this year. I don't know.
Maybe this year, yeah.
I mean, as I say, I like it. I like the fact that someone's got a bold vision, but we do need like reinvigoration in the sector. But I still feel like the fundamental, like it interestingly ties in a way with the BT announcement to me, because the operators themselves have to have a way of making more money. And I don't see that NVIDIA and Nokia getting it together on GPUs and talking about some of these weird and wacky ways that the RAN could be used necessarily changes the basic telco business model.
Right. Yes, I don't see it either. And we're being, to go full circle, we're being asked to just believe that it will. But, that's a big leap of faith. And actually, they don't really have to convince us. Although we're obviously a conduit for the message, they have to convince operators.
Yeah.
And every indication I get is that most operators are risk averse.
Yeah, and not convinced at the moment.
Yeah. All right, that seems like a good note on which to wrap it up. So we got a next week, and I'm going to go off and...
With a guest, potentially.
With a guest, week. Yeah. I never preview the guest in case they have to pull out at last minute. I just don't want to embarrass them for pulling out.
But there might be one.
There might be one. That we certainly intended to be one. And I'm going to go and hang out with my brother, who's over here from the Canary Islands. What do you think about 6G? Well, I can't shut him up about it.
Good to hear.
No, I'm not sure what we're going to chat. We've got a funny thing. We've got a chat group with him and two of our mates who you've met, Gavs and Johnny. And I get to meet Gav and Johnny all the time because we all live in the London area. Sean lives over in the fucking Canaries. And this is going to be one of the first time in years that these people he chats to remotely all the time, he actually gets to sit in a pub with them. And my experience is that the dynamic, there's such an incredibly different conversational dynamic between being sat in a room together with beers versus sort of banging on a text group. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. Anyway, we're running out of time. So I will just say thanks for listening and make sure you join us for the next one.